Bullies messed with the Mafia boss's daughter. Now they're in trouble. Imagine getting beaten up at school, only for your bullies to realize they just messed with the wrong person. Lincoln Academy was a place for the rich and powerful, but that didn't stop trouble from brewing. As the final bell rang, students poured out of the red brick building, eager to head home. Some ran to waiting cars, others lingered by the fence, chatting about their weekend plans. The air was warm, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from the soccer field. And in the middle of it all, one student walked alone, completely unaware that today, everything was about to change. Bella walked alone, slipping through the crowd without hesitation or delay. She didn't weave between groups or slow down to exchange goodbyes. Her steps were even, purposeful, and quiet, as if she existed on the edges of the noise rather than within it. She clutched the straps of her backpack, not in nervousness but in habit, her fingers resting lightly on the fabric. Her uniform was pristine, her hair neatly tied back, and her expression unreadable. Bella had been at Lincoln Academy for weeks, yet no one really knew her. She didn't gossip, didn't linger after class, and didn't react when whispers followed her through the halls. She wasn't shy or nervous. She simply moved through the school like she existed in a world of her own. Most students ignored her, but not everyone. Near the school fence, 3 boys watched her closely. Jake, Matt, and Kyle, self-proclaimed kings of the school. They ruled through intimidation, feeding off fear and humiliation. Reactions fueled them. That was how they controlled people. But Bella, she gave them nothing. No fear, no anger, no hesitation. They had tried before, a shoulder bump, a mocking remark, a step into her path, but she never flinched, never acknowledged them. That silence, that indifference, was something they couldn't stand. And today they had decided was the day they would finally break her. What they didn't know was that they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. Want to see how it all unfolds? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Like this video if you love a good twist, and let us know in the comments what do you think is going to happen next. Because when you mess with the wrong person, there's no turning back. Jake pushed off the fence, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. He stepped directly into Bella's path, blocking her way with a confident smirk. His friends, Matt and Kyle, mirrored his movements, spreading out just enough to cut off any exit. The casual afternoon hum of students chatting and cars honking in the distance faded slightly as a few curious eyes turned toward them. Bella stopped. Not abruptly, not in hesitation. She simply came to a halt, standing in place, with the same quiet composure she had carried all day. Most kids, when confronted like this, would react instinctively. A shift in posture, a glance around for help, a stiffening of the shoulders. Something to acknowledge the power shift in the air. But Bella did none of that. She didn't shrink back, didn't tense, didn't even blink faster. It was as if Jake and his friends weren't even worth the effort of a reaction. The moment stretched. The usual flow of schoolyard movement continued around them, but in this small circle of space, everything felt heavier. Jake's smirk faltered, just for a second, before he forced it back into place. He was used to people reacting, used to seeing discomfort, frustration, or outright fear. But Bella? She looked at him as if he was nothing more than an obstacle in her way, a minor inconvenience, a moment she would forget before she even reached the next block. He didn't like that. Testing her patience, he reached for her backpack, moving with the speed of someone who had done this before. He expected resistance, expected her to pull away too late, to stumble, to give him something to work with, but Bella was already ahead of him. Before his fingers could close around the strap, she shifted. Not a frantic dodge, not a panicked retreat, just a slight, calculated movement. Jake's hand met empty air. The sudden lack of contact threw him off balance for the briefest second, his momentum carrying him forward a step. A few students nearby caught the moment. Someone whispered, someone else let out a quiet laugh. Jake straightened quickly, heat rushing to his face. The amusement in the background stung worse than any insult. He clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He could feel Matt and Kyle watching, waiting to see how he would recover. Bella finally met his gaze. Her eyes held no trace of fear, no flicker of worry, just quiet certainty. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. "You should walk away." She wasn't asking. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't even warning him. It was a statement, as simple as saying the sky was blue. Jake felt a strange weight settle in his chest. It was unfamiliar, unwelcome. Matt and Kyle chuckled, trying to brush off the moment, but their laughter was thinner than before, their confidence shaken just enough to be noticed. No one had ever spoken to Jake like that before, and he wasn't about to forget it. As the city pulsed with energy, cars honking, neon lights flickering, voices overlapping in the late-night bustle, one part of town remained untouched by the chaos. It was a quiet estate on the outskirts, far from the crowded streets, guarded by iron gates and watchful eyes. Inside its towering walls, past a courtyard of stone fountains and manicured hedges, was a house unlike any other. It wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Every detail, from the sleek black cars lined up in the driveway to the men in tailored suits standing silently at the entrance, spoke of wealth, power, and something far more dangerous. Beyond the grand entrance, down a corridor where the polished marble floors reflected the dim glow of chandeliers, Bella sat in a study that few dared to enter uninvited. The air was thick with the scent of aged whiskey, leather-bound books, and the faint smokiness of cigar ash that had long since settled into the furniture. The shelves stretched high, filled with volumes of history, philosophy, and business. Each one carefully chosen, each one holding knowledge that had shaped the man sitting behind the massive mahogany desk. He was not just a businessman, not just a wealthy man. He was a man whose name alone could stop conversations. A man who did not ask for respect, but commanded it without effort. Dressed in a crisp black suit, he sat with effortless authority, his fingers lightly tapping against the surface of the desk. He was not a man given to emotion, not a man who wasted words on unnecessary questions. Every move he made, every glance was calculated. And at this moment, his sharp, cold eyes were locked onto his daughter. She stood before him, her expression unreadable, her posture straight. There was no trace of nervousness, no fidgeting, no uncertain shifting of weight from foot to foot. She had been raised in a house where strength was not taught, it was expected. Weakness had no place here. She did not need to be asked why she was there, he already knew. Instead, his voice cut through the silence with the precision of a blade. "Who?" One word. That was all. Bella reached for her backpack, setting it down with quiet finality. She spoke just as precisely as he did. No extra details, no unnecessary explanations. Just a name. He studied her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room stretched, but it was not the kind that created discomfort. It was the kind that held weight. The kind that meant something was already being decided before another word was spoken. Then he nodded once. No visible shift in emotion, no sign of concern or anger, only quiet understanding. Without another word, he reached for his phone. There was no urgency in his movements, no tension in his shoulders. He pressed a single button, lifting the device to his ear. The call was brief, a quiet instruction, a name, and an expectation. He did not ask questions, he did not give warnings, he did not need to. By the time he set the phone back down, the matter was already resolved. Tomorrow had been rewritten. Jake, Matt, and Kyle just didn't know it yet. The morning sun stretched across the skyline, washing Lincoln Academy in golden light. Students spilled into the courtyard, their laughter and chatter bouncing off the brick walls. Lockers slammed, footsteps echoed down the halls, and teachers raised their voices over the chaos, attempting to herd students to class. But beneath the routine, something felt off. A black car sat idling at the curb, its polished surface gleaming under the sun. It was sleek, expensive, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong near a school but commanded attention the moment it appeared. The doors remained shut, the engine running, waiting. 3 men stood near the entrance. They weren't teachers, and they certainly weren't parents. Their sharp suits were perfectly tailored, their shoes untouched by dust, their movements precise. They didn't glance around or shift impatiently like the other adults who occasionally visited the school. They simply stood there, watching, waiting. The effect was immediate. Students lowered their voices. Conversations faltered. Some nudged their friends, whispering, asking if anyone knew who they were or why they were there, but no one had answers. They could only guess. Inside, the hallways bustled with their usual morning chaos, the sounds of books thudding onto desks and sneakers squeaking against the floor. Jake, Matt, and Kyle walked in like they always did. Loud, laughing, shoving each other as if they owned the place. They moved through the hall without a care, their minds still stuck on yesterday's plan to finally break Bella. Then they noticed it. It wasn't immediate. At first it was just a shift in the air, a ripple of silence that spread ahead of them. Conversations quieted as they approached, students stepping aside without a word. The laughter and casual chatter that usually filled the halls had faded, replaced with stolen glances and hurried movements. Jake frowned. This wasn't normal. Then he saw her. Bella stood at the top of the stairs, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She wasn't in a hurry, wasn't concerned. She simply watched, waiting for them to realize what they had walked into. She wasn't alone. The men in suits stepped forward, their movements controlled, effortless. They didn't shove past students. They didn't need to. The crowd parted for them, creating an unspoken path straight to the three boys. Jake's confidence wavered. He didn't know who these men were, but something about them set his instincts on edge. Their presence wasn't loud or aggressive, but it carried a weight that made the air feel heavier, pressing down on him with an unspoken warning. He exchanged a glance with Matt and Kyle, searching for reassurance, but found only uncertainty staring back at him. One of the men stopped a few feet away. His voice was calm, professional. "Come with us." It wasn't a demand, it wasn't a question. Jake's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to ask why, to push back like he always did when teachers or other students challenged him, but his instincts screamed at him not to. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, hesitantly, the boys stepped forward. No one stopped them. No one said a word. The entire school watched as the doors swung shut behind them. The black car moved through the city, leaving familiar streets behind. The busy stores and crowded sidewalks disappeared, replaced by tall buildings and empty roads. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows. Jake, Matt, and Kyle sat in the back, their confidence gone. The laughter from earlier that morning felt like a distant memory. They didn't speak. They didn't dare. The air inside the car was heavy, thick with fear as they realized they were heading somewhere far from anything they knew. The driver never glanced back. The two men in suits seated up front never spoke. Their presence alone was enough to keep the boys frozen in place. Then the car slowed. A tall iron gate stood ahead, both massive and intimidating. With a quiet hum, it slid open, revealing a private estate unlike anything they had ever seen. The driveway was lined with smooth stone, leading to a house that felt more like a fortress. It was huge, elegant, but cold, its high walls and tinted windows giving away nothing. This wasn't just a home, it was a place where power ruled. The car stopped, the doors unlocked. No one told them to get out, they just knew. Stepping onto the stone driveway, their legs felt heavier than before. The wind carried a crisp chill, or maybe it was just their nerves. A set of double doors stood ahead, already opening for them, revealing a dimly lit interior where more men in suits waited. No one pushed them forward, but they walked anyway. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Their footsteps echoed against the marble floors, swallowed by the vastness of the space. Everything was pristine, polished wood, gleaming surfaces, not a single thing out of place. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a place where nothing happened by accident. They were led down a long hallway to a set of tall doors. Without hesitation, the men in suits pushed them open. The office inside was vast, yet somehow it felt smaller than any room they had ever been in. The air smelled of expensive whiskey, faint traces of cigar smoke, and something else. Something intangible. something that made the back of their necks prickle. At the center of it all sat a man, Bella's father. He didn't rise to greet them. He didn't gesture for them to sit. He simply looked up, his gaze sweeping over the three boys as if they weren't even worth his time. His fingers rested lightly against the wooden desk, his expression calm, unreadable. Jake swallowed hard. The man didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. His presence alone told them exactly who he was. Finally he spoke. "I hear you have a problem with my daughter." His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. There was no need for shouting when a quiet sentence could make the air feel razor-thin. Jake opened his mouth, but his throat was dry. He forced the words out, his voice weak, unsteady. "We didn't mean anything by it." Silence. The man leaned forward slightly, lacing his fingers together. The movement was slow, deliberate, carrying more weight than any threat ever could. "I don't like bullies," he said, his voice steady. "And I don't like people who don't know when to stop." Jake, Matt, and Kyle nodded so quickly it almost hurt. Bella stood to the side, watching. She hadn't said a word since they entered. She didn't need to. This wasn't her fight anymore. Her father regarded them for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch just long enough for their fear to settle deep, where it would never be forgotten. Then he stood. The sound of his chair shifting against the floor was the only noise in the room. "This is your only warning." It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. The weight of those words followed them as they stumbled out of the office, their legs shaky, their thoughts spinning. The ride back was just as quiet as the ride there, but it wasn't the same. By the time they reached familiar streets, something had changed. Jake, Matt, and Kyle never touched Bella again. Never looked at her. Never spoke her name. Because when you mess with the Mafia boss's daughter, you don't get a second chance.